This is Misti Green, and you're listening to the iLEAD Misti Blue Podcast, where strategy meets soul and faith finds its voice. Pull up a chair, the table is set. There's a difference between building something real and trying to make something work. And most of the time, you don't recognize that difference until you've already spent a meaningful amount of time in something that felt right, but never quite settled. At the beginning, it rarely feels off. There's connection, there's presence, and there are moments that feel genuine enough to stay for. And nothing about it immediately signals that it isn't going to last. It feels like something is forming, like something could become more. And so you stay in it with that quiet expectation that what you're experiencing now will eventually take shape into something steady. But over time, that distinction, it starts to surface, not through what people say, but through what actually continues to carry through with patterns and forward movement. You begin to notice that you're thinking beyond the moment, that you're paying attention to consistency or inconsistency, to direction, to whether what's being shared has somewhere to land while the other person is moving through the experience of it. They're present in a way that feels real, but not necessarily rooted in anything beyond what is happening in the present moment, in the right now. And it doesn't show up like conflict. It shows up simply as a quiet misalignment that you feel. You feel it in the gaps, in the lack of follow through, in the way that something can feel meaningful one day and extremely distant the next, often without any explanation. You start to recognize that you're offering something steady to something or someone that responds based on convenience. And the more you try to hold it all together, the more aware you become that you're the only one holding it together. And that's a difficult place to sit in, especially when there are parts of it that truly feel real, because they are. There are conversations that mattered. There are moments that were magical and where things felt extremely connected. Pieces of something that made you believe there was something worth holding on to. There was something worth building, which is why it doesn't feel simple, because it's not. You're not trying to hold on to nothing. You're trying to understand why something that feels like it should work doesn't. And if you're someone who moves with intention, that's usually where the internal questioning begins to turn toward you. You start wondering if you're asking for too much, if you're expecting too much structure and accountability, if maybe you should just let it be. It is what it is, and stop trying to define it. But clarity has a way of settling in, even when you're not ready for it. It doesn't happen all at once, and often not through one defining moment, but through patterns that repeat themselves until they're impossible to ignore. You begin to see what's consistent and what isn't. You begin to notice what holds and what fades the moment it requires effort, intentionality, and action. And eventually, you're faced with something that doesn't feel dramatic, but it feels undeniable. You simply can't shake it. You weren't building the same thing. And once you see that, it becomes difficult to unsee it. It becomes challenging to move forward in the same way you did before. You start to recognize that nothing about the situation is necessarily wrong. It's just not aligned, and it becomes draining. You're approaching it with intention, thinking about what it can be and what could be created, what can be sustained, while the other person is engaging in something that feels good, it feels light, but isn't being carried forward with that person in the same way. And that realization doesn't come with a clean break or even a clear ending or what we like to call closure. It comes with tension, because part of you still feels the connection, the moments in the past, the conversations that took place, because those were real, but it still remembers the moments that made you believe there was something here. And letting go of that doesn't feel easy, and it's often not immediate. It feels like sitting between what you experienced, the beautiful, the magical moments, and what you now understand, the inconsistency, the pattern, and those two don't always match at first. This is where people tend to stay longer than they should, not because they don't see it, but because they're hoping it will shift back. It will revert. It will go back to those beginning phases, hoping it will deepen, hoping it will stabilize and become steady, and hoping that what feels inconsistent will eventually become something steady once more. And sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. And the longer you stay in something hoping it will become what it hasn't shown you it can be consistently, the harder it becomes to be honest about what's actually there, what's real. That's where clarity starts to cost something. It asks you to stop negotiating with what you're seeing and to be honest about what's actually being sustained. It asks you to look beyond the moments that felt good and pay attention to what is consistently being offered, because what is sustained will always tell you more than what is said. Scripture speaks to this in a way that feels both practical and deeply personal. In Luke 14:28, there's a question about building, about whether someone would begin something without first considering what it will take to complete it. And while that's often applied to projects or commitments or timelines, deadlines, deliverables, it carries just as much weight in the way that we approach relationships, environments, jobs, and the decisions that truly shape our lives. Anything meaningful requires more than just presence. It requires intention, consistency, and the willingness to remain engaged even when it becomes inconvenient, even when the stretch begins to happen. Comfort doesn't require any of that. Comfort allows you to stay where things feel good without asking anything of you. It allows connection without accountability and presence without responsibility. And while that can feel enough in the moment, it doesn't create anything that can actually hold over time. It will leave you depleted. And when those two approaches meet, someone will always feel the difference first, the misalignment, the tension. Usually the one who is being steady, who is attempting to build. And when that happens, the question shifts. It's no longer about whether you're asking for too much. It becomes about whether you're trying to build in a space where building was never the intention. And that distinction changes everything. It moves you out of self-doubt and into self-awareness. It allows you to see that the tension you've been feeling isn't coming from something being wrong with you. It's coming from something being misaligned in what you're participating in. And clarity asks you to respond to that, not perfectly, and often not immediately, but it does ask you to be reflective and to approach it with honesty. It asks you to acknowledge when something feels good but isn't moving in a direction that aligns with your values, your goals, your purpose, or what you're actually trying to create. It asks you to release the idea that presence alone is enough to accept that anything meant to last requires shared intention. And that's where the cost becomes real. Because clarity will often ask you to walk away from spaces, from people that feel good, but don't allow for growth. Clarity will ask you to release connections that offer moments, but not movement. Clarity will ask you to choose alignment over comfort, even when comfort would be easier to stay in. That isn't a simple decision, and it isn't one that comes without true, raw emotion. But over time, what becomes clear is that not everyone is approaching life with the same level of intention. And that isn't always about character as much as it is about readiness or capacity. Some people are building and some people are simply experiencing. And while both have their place, they don't always fit together. You can't build something lasting with someone who is only oriented toward the moment, the dopamine hit, the adrenaline rush. And recognizing that doesn't make you rigid, it makes you clear. Clear about what you're building, clear about what it requires, clear about what you can actually live in consistently and support. And when you reach that place, your decisions begin to shift organically. You stop trying to make things fit that don't. You stop over explaining what you already see, what you understand, what you discern. You stop holding on to moments that don't carry forward. You start recognizing the pattern and you begin to accept them as the reality. You begin to choose based on alignment, not just feeling. Because at some point you realize something that changes the way you move completely is something that you do not want. What feels good isn't always what's right, and what's right doesn't always feel easy, but it will be steady. And steady is what actually lasts. If this met you in a season where something has been shifting, something is changing, or where things feel uncomfortably quiet, I invite you to go back to the prior episode, The Power in the Pause, where we discussed that pausing and pruning are necessary for new growth to happen, where seasons of transition carry great weight for our future. If you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to share it with a friend and to stay connected. You can find me on Instagram at Misti Green or by accessing my website at iLEADMB.com. Until next time, this is Misti Green, and you've been listening to the iLEAD Misti Blue Podcast, where strategy meets soul and faith finds its voice.